So people ask me all the time, they're like, well, why don't you take these kids under your wing and like teach them and tell them? I'm like, we are in a completely different era now. Like, there is no fixing what we've got going right now with everybody running over everybody. They would much rather crash than win a race. I don't get it.
Kyle Busch. The name alone used to strike fear into the heart of every racetrack. He was the greatest driver in NASCAR history, a man who survived thousands of crashes at 200 miles per hour. Yet, in a cruel twist of irony, he passed away in what was supposed to be the safest place on Earth, a dead, quiet simulator room. How does a man who conquered hundreds of peaks of glory succumb to the very thing he thought he had under complete control? The answer doesn't lie in the record books. Today, let us look back at the journey of a legend to truly understand the steep price he paid not just with speed, but with his very life to become an immortal icon in our hearts. The kid from the city of Betts. Kyle Thomas Busch was born on May 2, 1985, in Las Vegas, Nevada. He grew up in a city built on a single, unwavering belief: the one who goes all in when everyone else folds is the one who takes the whole pot. It's hard to imagine a more fitting birthplace for a racer of his caliber. His family originally hailed from Schaumburg, Illinois, before heading west. By the time he was 8, Kyle was already racing go-karts in parking lots and neighborhood cul-de-sacs. His father, Tom, was a mechanic. He carried that quiet brand of American ambition, putting his head down, working without complaint, and racing as an amateur on weekends, just to keep a certain spark inside him alive. His mother, Gay, held the rest of it all together. There was already a racer in the house before Kyle. His older brother, Kurt, 7 years his senior, was already fast, already on the radar of the pros. Kyle was the little brother on the sidelines, observing and absorbing everything the mechanical language of his father hunched over engine blocks, the electric current of competition radiating from his brother. Then came the statement that shaped everything. In 2001, before the world even knew who Kyle was, Kurt made it clear that people had not seen the best Busch driver yet. He believed his little brother was the most talented driver in the family. That was not just a brotherly compliment. It sounded like a verdict from someone who understood speed better than most. In a way, Kyle's legend was already being written before his career had truly begun. Kyle spent the next 20 years proving Kurt right. He did it 234 times. But before any of those wins happened, someone almost ended his career. Cast aside at 20, Kyle entered NASCAR at 16. While kids his age were worrying about high school drama, he was trading paint with grown men in full-blown stock cars. On the surface, he was reckless. But underneath that bravado lay a meticulousness that only true generational talents are entitled to possess. He signed with Hendrick Motorsports and took home the Cup Series Rookie of the Year honors. Then, before he even turned 21, he was let go. Let's pause on that detail. The man who would go on to become the winningest driver in the history of NASCAR's top 3 national touring series was shown the door by a race team before he was barely out of his teens. It's the kind of rejection that can end a career before it starts, the kind of shove that sends most young kids packing for home, questioning everything they ever believed about themselves. Kyle didn't question himself. He recalibrated. In 2005, he landed at Joe Gibbs Racing, and the raw potential always simmering inside him began to crystallize into an undeniable truth. He wasn't just fast. He was fast everywhere on superspeedways, road courses, short tracks, in the rain, and on the final lap when absolutely everything was on the line. Most drivers have a strength and a weakness. Kyle seemed to only have strengths. But that rejection at 20 left behind something else, something deeper. The fear of being cast aside became his fuel. It also hardwired an instinct into him. Never let off the gas, even when you probably should. That instinct would save his career time and time again over the next 2 decades. 21 years later, it would be the very thing that killed him. The world didn't even have time to love him. They were too busy booing. The villain of an entire sport. Kyle Busch didn't just beat his opponents. He made them feel defeated. Every lap was a statement. Every pass a new line, in an argument he'd been having since he was old enough to understand the weight of expectations. It was a psychological dimension that transcended pure mechanics and race strategy. He polarized crowds in a way only the utterly dominant can. Mediocrity never generates that kind of heat. People either loved him with the fierce devotion reserved for the misunderstood, or hated him with the blistering intensity reserved for a guy who wins too damn much and refuses to apologize for it, too. Out of that divide, a community was born. They called themselves Rowdy Nation. They didn't just root for him. They claimed him as their own, seeing in his refusal to soften his edges something they desperately needed themselves. Rowdy, he earned every single letter of that nickname. The toll of that position was something few noticed. When you are the gold standard, anything short of victory lane is deemed a failure. A second-place finish might be a triumph for someone else. For Kyle, it was an interrogation. You weren't just racing him. You were racing against a conviction. I am the best guy out here. Now prove me wrong. Very few ever did, and no one did it consistently enough. It was a very specific brand of loneliness, being hated simply for winning. His rivals were no slouches either. Jeff Gordon, Jimmy Johnson, Denny Hamlin, Kevin Harvick. And then there was another name, Dale Earnhardt Jr., a man who shared a tumultuous history with Kyle over the years. No one could have predicted that it would be Dale Jr. holding the final puzzle piece to this solitary driver's soul in the waning days of his life. Behind that staggering number was a transaction for which no one ever saw the receipt. The bill no one saw. Say that number slowly. 234 wins across NASCAR's top 3 national series. More than Richard Petty. More than Dale Earnhardt. More than Jeff Gordon. More than Jimmy Johnson. That breaks down to 63 Cup wins, 69 truck wins, and 102 in Xfinity records that no modern driver can even touch. In February of 2026, at 40 years old, he still claimed the pole position at the Daytona 500. It wasn't some ceremonial gift handed to an aging legend. It was a testament to the pure, unadulterated speed still coursing through his veins. Yet, that very peak performance was a glamorous smokescreen hiding a grim reality. The stopwatch never tells you the actual balance remaining inside a man. Behind that massive number was a brutal transaction for which no one ever saw the bill. His body was like a savings account that never accrued interest. Every race was a withdrawal. From the horrific crash at Daytona in 2015 that shattered his legs, to the thousands of hours enduring G-forces crushing his spine, neck, and joints over the past 22 years, these were tiny, silent withdrawals, slowly accumulating in places medical reports could never fully capture. By 2026, that account had hit rock bottom, running dangerously on empty. And ironically, the account holder just kept tearing around the track, fighting on the fumes of an exhaustion he wasn't even fully aware of. The precarity didn't stop at his physical health. Even the estimated $80 to $120 million fortune he'd worked so painstakingly to build wasn't an impenetrable shield. In 2024, an $8.5 million lawsuit against an insurance company served as a grim reminder. Even as the absolute king of the track, Kyle could still be outmaneuvered in dimly lit offices by men with pens and contracts riddled with traps. It was a different kind of battlefield, one where the trademark rowdy tenacity couldn't control the outcome. That lawsuit left a crack in his belief that he could dictate his own destiny. It proved that neither a massive economic machine nor blinding fame could protect him from the hazards that lay beyond the reach of his throttle pedal. But between the shadowy offices of litigation and the silent, grinding attrition of the racetrack, the only place that offered him true peace was a modest home in Charlotte, a place filled with people who didn't care if he was a legend or a villain, but only knew him as a husband and a father. The man who was rarely home. The world knew Kyle Busch as Rowdy, the fearless driver who never backed down on the track. But at home, his wife, Samantha, knew a much quieter side of him that fans rarely got to see. She met him when he was already famous, already feared, already the standard other drivers measured themselves against. But she saw past the helmet. They married in 2010, and Samantha never lived in his shadow. She built rowdy energy into her own business while standing beside a man whose life was ruled by racing. Their son, Brexton, was born in 2015, the same year Kyle won his first Cup Series championship. It should have been the perfect year, but it was also a year of injuries, rehab, travel, and missed time at home. Their daughter, Lennox, arrived in 2020, and something in Kyle seemed softer. The man who raced with fire loved his children with a gentleness fans rarely saw. At home, life was simple. School drop-offs, family dinners, vintage race cars, quiet charity work. For a man gone almost every weekend, an ordinary night with his family was the real luxury. That was the sad part. Kyle had money, fame, trophies, and everything success could buy. But he never had enough time with the people he loved most. That is why May 19th mattered. In Durham, he went go-kart racing with Brexton. After a lifetime at 200 miles per hour, he spent that afternoon moving slowly beside his son. Later, he shared how proud he and Samantha were of the young man Brexton was becoming and how far they believed he could go. Now, those words feel painfully final. The same drive that gave Kyle everything also kept pulling him away from home. He could outrun almost everyone on the track. But some things speed cannot outrun. And 11 days later, everything began to fall apart. The 11 days no one saw coming. Every story has a moment when the ending quietly shows itself. For Kyle Busch, it came 11 days before he died. On May 10th at Watkins Glen, he was fighting a sinus infection on one of the toughest road courses in racing. Late in the race, he radioed his team and asked the doctor to have a shot ready as soon as he got out of the car. Millions heard it live. He finished 8th, got treated, and kept going. That was Kyle. Pain was never a reason to stop. It was just part of the job. A cough was not a warning to him. It was noise to push through. On May 16th, he mentioned the cough again in an interview, almost like it was nothing. Nobody panicked, because Kyle had always talked that way. One day earlier, on May 15th, he won the final race of his life at Dover. He started from the pole, led most of the race, and when asked why winning never got old, he said something that now hurts to hear. You never know when it's your last. It was his 69th Truck Series win. It was also his final victory lane. On May 17th, he finished 17th at Charlotte. At the time, it felt like just another result. Now, it was the last time he ever sat behind the wheel in a race. The saddest part is that he was still making plans. The day before he died, he was texting Dale Earnhardt Jr. about running a Cars Tour race on May 30th. He wanted to use Dale Jr.'s number 8 and surprise the fans. Even then, Kyle was thinking about the next race. On May 20th, he went to the General Motors Technical Center to prepare for the Coca-Cola 600. But his body had nothing left. The 911 call described him struggling to breathe, feverish, coughing blood, and close to passing out. The cough he kept pushing through had finally caught him. He walked to the restroom and collapsed. The caller kept saying he was conscious, almost like saying it could keep him here. Then the ambulance left. And for 23 hours, there was only silence. 23 hours of silence. There is a specific kind of waiting that has no name. It isn't hope, because hope looks forward. It isn't grief, because grief already knows the outcome. It lives in the agonizing space in between the hours when the phone has already rung but the words haven't been spoken to the world. His family sat inside a reality that was about to belong to everyone, but for a few final hours belonged strictly to them. At 10:23 a.m. on the morning of May 21st, the family released a brief statement. Kyle was suffering from a serious illness, was hospitalized, and would miss the weekend's events in Charlotte. The NASCAR world read it and processed it in the most logical way. He's sick, he'll miss a race, and then he'll be back. But the dense weight of the words serious illness, paired with the absence of any reassuring fluff, signaled to careful readers that this was no ordinary press release. At 5:40 p.m., he was gone, 41 years old, 3 days before the Coca-Cola 600. His name was still on the entry list. His car was still sitting in the garage. Shortly after, the family released the cause, a severe bout of pneumonia that spiraled into sepsis, bringing on rapid, overwhelming complications. There was nothing left to speculate. The sport ground to a halt in a way it hadn't since February of 2001, when a black number 3 car hit the wall at Daytona and never came back out whole. Denny Hamlin wrote, "Absolutely impossible to comprehend this news." And Dale Earnhardt Jr., who had spent years at odds with Kyle, took to his podcast, choking back tears as he recounted their final text exchange about the number 8 car and those 2 words, race fans. He said he was just grateful they had finally found the time to become friends. The old enemy wept. So, what did the world do when he left? And what exactly did he leave behind? How a Sport Mourns. On a Saturday morning in Charlotte, Richard Childress Racing was the first team to roll into the garage. They unloaded the car that was supposed to belong to Kyle in absolute silence, as every other team stood and watched. The familiar number 8 had been swapped for number 33. The reality of his death began to seep into the bones of every person in the garage in that exact moment. RCR announced they would retire the number 8 for the remainder of the 2026 season in his honor. NASCAR, after consulting with the team, quietly scrubbed his name from the driver's standings simply because they didn't want fans to suffer the heartbreak of seeing his name there every week. Then, at the Coca-Cola 600, Samantha and the children made their first public appearance. During the moment of silence, they wept in the middle of a racetrack that had once echoed with both deafening cheers and vicious boos for that very man. But between all the staggering numbers and solemn tributes, there is a simple, piercing question he leaves behind for all of us. Some things you just can't outrun. He left behind 234 wins, 2 championships, a huge fortune, and a racing empire. But in the end, none of it could buy him healthy lungs. No trophy could give back the years his body had been pushed too hard. That is the heartbreaking truth behind all the glory. Kyle spent his life outrunning everyone. But some things cannot be outrun. Still, his story did not stop with him. The young drivers he helped are still racing. William Byron and Christopher Bell both carried pieces of his influence. Samantha keeps moving forward. Lennox will know her father through old footage. And Brexton is already chasing speed with the same fire in his blood. That makes Kyle's final message to his son even harder to read. "There is no limit to what you will achieve," was meant for Brexton. Now it feels like the last lesson from a man who never believed in limits. His 234 wins still stand like a mountain. But somewhere, a kid in a go-kart is already trying to climb it. That was not just goodbye. It was a starting line. If you followed Kyle Busch's career, tell us in the comments where you are watching from and whether you cheered or booed the number 8 car.